Greetings and salutations, neighbor. I have here something very interesting. You want to see? This is the full collection archive of Vivienne Westwood. Isn't it just amazing? Vivian is often referred to as the godmother of punk, and she created a lot of the stylistic visuals of the original punk movement in the 1970s. Her t-shirts from the era, sold at a shop called Sex, are rough, explicit, the very epitome of cool. But unlike most trendsters who burn bright for a specific counterculture, Vivian survived punk, both literally and stylistically. Her post-punk collections were interesting, cool, and then in the mid-1980s, 1986 to be specific, she created a collection called Mini Crini, which was essentially a love letter to the 18th and 19th centuries, chopped and punked and utterly transformed into what became her signature high fashion style. Her entire career can be overly simplified into exploring the tension between naive punk, high fashion, and frankly nerdy historical fashion. Vivian passed December 29th, 2022. I truly believe the best legacy anyone can leave is one of inspiration, something I feel no shortage of when looking at Vivian's work. So naturally, I'll be exploring her approach by making an ensemble in the spirit of Vivienne Westwood, but somehow trying to make it even more historically based. One very specific and explicit reference Vivian returned to constantly through her career is the corset or stays or whatever. She referenced structured undergarments from basically every time period from the early modern period forward, so I think that may be a good place for me to start as well. And that means switching to a different book, Patterns of Fashion 5. With Pinterest, all of these books are kind of redundant, by the way, but I really love paging through a physical book. This is my starting point. This is a pair of stays with a stomacher dated 1650 to 80. This pair has been on my list for quite a while, as has the mid-17th century. Vivian visited this time period several times in her collections. So yes, here we have the title of this series, Baroque Punk, 1970s, but make it 1670s, a love letter to Vivienne Westwood. Vivian has really given the corset legs and done just about every iteration, with leggings, skirts attached, unstructured, and versions that look like they're straight from a painting. As always, I want to give myself the best chance of actually wearing this in real life, so I'm thinking separates. The stays, of course, will be the central part of this look, but they are a ton of work, so I will be patterning and mocking them up now so that I can use them to plan out the bottom of the look, but then they're gonna get their own video. I began by tile printing the pattern to the life-size scale from the book via Photoshop. This was very small, so I scaled it up uniformly by 15% and then increased the width by an extra 5%. I am not 100% sure what's happening here, but it's happening there on both of these. So obviously there's something there in the shaping of all of this weirdness. This piece was just so much longer than the corresponding seam right here. So I ended up folding it up a little bit because it was just so wrinkly, and I was like, that is not going to look cute, even when it's counterbalanced by the corresponding piece over here. I'll probably use all of these pattern pieces just as is, and then I will redraft this one and kind of even out this line. This, I don't know, I'm just going to make the full thing and we'll see what happens with this. Once the piece is in real fabric and counterbalanced with the other half, then this may all make more sense. Also, you have to consider that, I mean, this would be boned, and so it obviously wouldn't be like flopping around like this. It would be stiff. That stiffness may cause this to have some shape that it's supposed to have. We're on the right track at least. I properly trued up the back panel pattern on pattern paper. It took some fiddling since the original has a slight bend, and I didn't want to lose that when making the whole thing shorter. This will definitely take some further smoothing down the road. It's important to ultimately fit boned garments with boning, so I cut the pattern from 2 layers of calico fabric. I marked some of the boning channels and sewed them on the machine. Not perfect, but for now I'm only concerned with getting things close enough that I can use the mock-up as a stand-in to drape the bottom of the look. So this is where the stage journey ends for this video. My goal here wasn't to recreate a designer's look, but to learn from observing the way someone else works. Vivian's style is very free, and much of what she's done looks like it's just fabric thrown at a model, in the best way. If I can take away anything from an exploration of her work, it would be this freedom of expression. I think what really makes these pieces work is that they're then anchored with something familiar. A corset, a neckline, sometimes just a pocket or a seam placed just so. Some little or big detail that assures you it's still a real garment. In contrast, skirts from the 17th century are probably exactly what someone would picture if you say historical skirt. They're floor length, often even longer in portraits with some length puddling on the floor, with the fullness pleated into the waist with generously sized knife pleats. They are mostly solid colored, made with what appears to be satin, usually with a wide silver lace trim at the bottom and occasionally going down the front as well. The fullness kind of hits its apex at the hip, which seems to be a bit lower than true hip. This is all important because all of these proportions balance out the bodice, which is very specifically shaped. The silhouettes are so specific with that stiff Baroqueness, but by the 1670s there are definitely glimpses of a more unstructured Rococo beginning to emerge. By unstructured, I mean highly structured, but with loose, draped fabric that's meant to look totally organic, but is actually 100% controlled, like a 2010s messy bun. With these observations in mind, I draped the fabric for the bottom of the ensemble directly onto the form. This is an old bedsheet, by the way. No, 80s florals are not punk, but I was always more of a thrift store art school punk anyway, and subverting the fashion industry's reliance on virgin materials is about as punk as it gets. Plus, this bedsheet is beautiful, and threadbare, and has holes, so not useful as a bedsheet anymore. I came to the conclusion that you can quickly drape something interesting, no problem, but making that something read as a true skirt is trickier. I decided rather than draping and making a pattern, I'd rip the bedsheet to the length I wanted my hem to hit, and finish off the raw edges so that I could drape and sew the final piece directly on the form. I wanted a nice deep hem. I also wanted to play around with structure and transparency since the sheet was so thin. I attached a 10-inch strip of cotton canvas to the bottom of the skirt, right sides together. I pressed the canvas to the inside of the skirt, leaving a clean edge at the hem. I sewed several lines of stitching at the bottom of the hem to keep the facing in place and add some line work to the hem edge. I had a feeling a lot of the inside of the skirt would be seen from the right side, so I added some visual interest by attaching a white twill tape to the top of the facing. I had originally wanted to do this like a Hong Kong hem, but that would look weird from the right side since the whole thing is transparent. So I sewed the twill tape directly to the raw edge of the canvas. I sewed one line of stitching down the center and a line right at both edges. The raw edge is still there. Viv herself does not shy away from a raw edge, but all those rows of stitching should keep the fraying to a minimum. I liked the drapes where the skirt kind of met at the side and the excess fabric cascaded downward, which means the side of the sheet will need to be finished also. One of my biggest challenges with this is to stop the whole thing from reading old bedsheet. So rather than just hemming the side like a bedsheet, I decided to do another facing, this time in the bedsheet fabric. I didn't want to disassemble the drape, so I attempted to sew the facing while the skirt was on the form. Don't do this. It's just stupid. Anyway, I sewed the facing to the side of the panel, right sides together, and pressed it to the inside. I pressed a 1/2-inch seam allowance to the inside of the facing. I felted this down, being very careful to only catch a single thread from the panel fabric. The way the drape sits, there is basically a square of fabric hanging at the front, so I added another facing to the top of the panel and mitered the corner. I redraped my fully finished panel and basted the front portion that folds over to the waistband. This building and finishing as I went approach is something I hadn't done since fashion school, back when I didn't know how to properly make something. But you know what? We're trying to be free here, so it's okay. The back of the skirt has pleats that roughly mimic the pleats of the 17th century, which I pinned in place along the waistband, right sides together. I very carefully sewed the draped and pleated pieces to the waistband. I pressed a 1/4-inch seam allowance to the inside of the waistband, or I guess this part is actually a tie, technically. I then added cotton twill tape to the bottom edge of the inside of the waistband. I trimmed away any fuzzies from the seam allowance and fell stitched the other side of the twill tape over the raw edge. The waistband has a tie, but I added a hook and eye to the opening for stability. And here we are. This is not the official corset for this look, but I think it actually still looks pretty Vivian. This was a journey, and I loved it. Like I said, I haven't done the whole build it as I go technique since fashion school, and I forgot how freeing it can be to just jump in rather than planning everything. I'm super excited to work on the stays, and I hope you'll join me for the adventure. If you enjoyed this video, I always appreciate a thumbs up, and make sure you hit subscribe to see the final look. I upload about every fortnight, so more Baroque punk is on its way soon. Bye!